potential static fire test at Massis, 2 ship transport stands with SPMTs at Sanchez, concrete floor in High Bay 2, and possible Starship launch on the 17th. Oh, and the launch license is here! Welcome and thanks for stopping by for this week's Starbase Flyover Update episode 24, brought to you by the one and only RGV Aerial Photography. I'm Jeffy and I'll be your guide today as we check out the unrelenting progress at SpaceX's facilities located at Starbase in Boca Chica, Texas. There's not much room in the back of a Cessna 172, so buckle up, sit back and enjoy the views from 10,500 feet. Alright, let's begin here at Massis' structural test site. Special shout out to Proky for creating these labelled maps for all 4 sites at Starbase. We can see what Massis looked like as the most recent flyover photo taken Wednesday, November 8th. We'll be going over a total of 9 points of interest today. Can you guess what they are? We'll start off this week's episode with easily the most happening part of this test site, near the southernmost end across the Rio Grande River from Mexico. At the burst pad, the mounds of dirt surrounding it have been completely deconstructed without any burst occurring. This could be a good sign, as it's easily possible SpaceX already tested the E-Dome beyond its limits without failure, and are now choosing to retire it after verifying its design structural integrity ahead of its debut on Booster 10. Following this newly poured asphalt road base, which conveniently bypasses the centre of Massis, we arrive at the area we saw being cleared the last several weeks. Why does this road exist in the first place, you ask? One potential theory is that a new test stand is due to be installed in this location. Adding weight to this theory is the appearance of this new thick formwork, where rebar will be installed and concrete poured. As seen in this render by the space engineer, here's what this area would look like with the addition of a hot firing stand accompanied by CH4 tanks. Although such a theory does have its drawbacks, including the extreme close proximity to Mexico which would require substantial flame trench diverters, this static fire testing stand does indeed pose many benefits in streamlining the booster and ship testing process. Not to mention that aforementioned theory might just explain this yellow drill, of which similar ones were previously used for foundation work after IFT-1. Is this a sign of things to come? Either way, I'm sure that this is no regular old building foundation. Despite this, one would be wise to take any speculation with a spoonful of salt, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. What do you think will become of this area? Let us know in the comments down below. Shifting down the image to address the elephant in the room, Booster 11, which has had no additional testing since the 18th of October. Now looking at the newly arrived hippos, which are used as heat exchangers for cooling cryogenic liquids before loading, the second hippo manifold has arrived and is waiting with the other for installation. Keeping in line with the tank farm discussion, the newly poured pedestals have had large wooden crane mats installed between them to prepare for the lifting of yet another liquid nitrogen cryogenic storage tank onto the pedestals. These serve as the surface on which the crane will operate, providing protection for the unpaved ground below. That ground won't be unpaved for long though. Below the LN2 tanks, additional concrete has been poured for employee parking, with additional future concrete pouring expected below that. More fresh concrete can be seen here, next to these new high-pressure gas tanks. Enough of this concrete, let's move to the opposite side of the site, shall we? As we pass by Payload Bay Test Article S24.2 in the structural test cage with no noticeable changes, we arrive at the new building under construction. Still no sign of bridge crane assembly yet, but we did see additional steel framework being lifted to the roof and sides of this new building. And that's all the changes at Massis' test site for this week. Next is Sanchez. Before we get started, take a look at this map displaying the layout of Sanchez. Now let's compare this photo from the flyover on Friday, November 3rd, with the aerial shot captured in this week's flyover on Wednesday, November 8th. Getting started at the west entrance to the Sanchez site, we can see the ground fabrication building has a completed roof finally. Just behind the slab on the leftmost side of the property, we can see concrete vaults have been set in place. This is likely a termination point for the run of conduit coming from the power distribution lot. Over in the stand construction lot, we see the clamp arms for the second black stand to the right have been moved. It's unclear at this point why they have moved further away from the stand, but it's possible they're making room for construction of an additional stand to begin. Not much visible progress has been made on the next white stand, but crews are likely outfitting the inside of the structure with the necessary electronics, hydraulics, and other components necessary for operation. As for the work platform that will rest inside the stand, we can see additional structural elements being welded on. This platform may have a completed floor by our next flyover at this rate. In between the white stand and its platform, a smaller platform is under construction. Could this be associated with the new black stands? Tell us what you think in the comments. Looking down at the black stand on the left, we see scaffolding that surrounded the ring in the last several weeks has been removed. While scaffolding still sits inside the ring, it's possible we're getting close to a move of this mysterious piece. Finally. Those new white components we saw being fabricated last week have now disappeared, along with the tents that were next to them. Add those to the list of mysterious disappearances we've had lately, hopefully we'll notice them in use somewhere else around the site. Moving up into the scrapyard, or maybe one of the scrapyards, we see that the old aft section has returned from its brief journey to the rocket garden area. Just last week we saw this section along with several ring stands moved to the upper portion of the air separation lot. While the ring stands appear to have stayed up there, we can see the aft section made its way back down here, next to some of the other pieces being scrapped. Maybe it's finally time to meet the torch. Over to the right, in the area formerly occupied by those ring stands, we can see what looks to be components for a new crane. In addition to these components, we can see more currently awaiting offload across Highway 4, just in front of the site. Shifting up to the new concrete structure being built next to the power distribution lot, we can see most of the concrete forms have now been removed from the walls and the concrete pillars in the centre poured. In addition, it appears gravel is being added to the insides to raise the level of the anticipated slab. If we switch to an angle from the east, you get a better feel for just how much gravel is being added to the inside. Still no clues to what this might be, but at the speed this is going up, we shouldn't have to wait too long to find out. Just next door to the building, a concrete pump truck is being used to secure the conduit and vaults inside the trench. Over at the air separation plant, or what's left of it, we see the Big Grove GMK 7550 crane connected to the tower, the heart of the now defunct operation, for removal to begin. Over on the far left, not only can we see the SPMT sporting a ship transport stand spotted here last week, but we can also see the ship puck shuttle stand and SPMTs that moved just after our last flyover. Rounding out Sanchez, we'll move down to the rocket garden, where not much has changed since last week. The only interesting thing of note is the base of S29, where we can see a windbreak has been set up to allow crews to work underneath without having to deal with the ever-persistent sea breeze. Now let's head to the build site, where you can see some concrete action happening on top of the new mega bay. Now entering the build site, where those who haven't paid as much attention since IFT1 might be surprised to find a whole factory and mega bay have appeared in less than the 7-month gap between flights. Refer to Proky's map of the various bays and factories as we make our way around the site. Before we check out this week's progress, let's do something a bit different this week, as we compare this photo from the flyover on April 18th, 2023, just 2 days before IFT1, to this week's photo taken November 8th. A lot has changed, hasn't it? Looking at this angled view of the build site taken by Irma, we immediately see that much progress has been made on the roof of Mega Bay 2. First of all, the floor that will support the office has been poured with concrete, the right-hand side of it anyway. In addition, the roof of Mega Bay 2 has seen progress with the lifting of steel roofing framework by the LR11000 crane. Because the roof is not a necessary requirement for putting Mega Bay 2 into operation, we could very well see vehicles entering it shortly, at least after the concrete floor for the vehicles to sit on is poured. SN16 was the first vehicle and only ship to ever enter Mega Bay 1, where it was subsequently scrapped. Could we see a repeat of this with Mega Bay 2 and S26? One might be forgiven for thinking SpaceX has cut thin slotted lines into Mega Bay 1's walls. In reality, those are giant light bars, lighting up the Mega Bay like a portal into another dimension. Don't believe me? Just tune into Lab Padre's Sentinel cam at night to see just how bright it's gotten. Over here, we see Booster 10 still receiving its 33 Raptor engines on the engine stand. Booster 12 and the LOX tank section of Booster 13 are unseen in this image, with no further stacks this week as production of boosters is slowed as SpaceX is likely focusing on launch preparations. Same thing applies to ship construction, with S32 remaining one section short of a full stack after stacking onto its mid-lock section on the third. Work continues on S30 and S31, which are on the right side of the high bay. Panning down to the ring yard, we see two sections of B-13 ahead of installation in Mega Bay 1, right next to the hot staging test article, which has been here since mid-October, as well as this E-dome. Shifting to this top-down shot of the Star Factory's ongoing expansion, workers are laying and covering up the last of the electrical conduit on the very left side of the plot of land previously occupied by the Mid-Bay and Tents 1 and 2. On the right, the digging of square footings has progressed, with additional rebar being laid compared to last week. None of the footers for this area have been poured as far as we can see, but we would be wise to keep a close eye on this area in the weeks to come. Moving all the way up to the top end of the Star Factory by Tent 4's tile factory, new concrete has appeared for an unknown reason. Lastly, over at the village side of the build site, we see new prefabricated homes have appeared since last week. This is speculated to be temporary housing for contractors working at Starbase. And that's all the changes at the build site this week. Before moving on to the much anticipated launch site, to help our content reach a wider audience, be sure to leave a like if you're enjoying this video so far. We round out today's episode with some interesting developments around the launch site, plus some exciting news. First, take a look at this labelled map as a reminder of what the site layout is. Here's the slider to highlight changes from our last flyover on Friday, November 3rd, followed by a picture from this week's flyover on Wednesday, November 8th. Getting started here at the suborbital site, we see the height extension for the perimeter wall is nearing completion. Crews were working to remove the formwork from inside in the parking lot at the time of the flyover. At the bottom of this image, however, we see a new structure being formed at the entrance to the site. If we zoom in, we can see scaffolding has been erected to create what appears to be a wall connecting the two on each side of the entrance. Switching angles, we can see crews removing the formwork making their way across the wall toward Highway 4. Zooming in at the entrance again, we don't see where any footing work has been performed, which would be required before erecting a wall here like we observed for the adjacent walls. Using this excellent footage shot by ex-user WillsPro, we get a better idea of what may be happening here. On top of the scaffolding appears to be a platform not only for employees to walk on, but also to support a suspended beam to connect the two walls together. This could provide the framework for a future sign coming to the site, while also allowing personnel and crowd tankers to enter here as well. What would you want the sign to say? Let me know in the comments below. Over on suborbital pad A, Booster 9's transport stand can still be seen on standby. Just off to the left of the pad we see the OLM work platform stand, followed by the Raptor installation stand on the far left. As you'll see a little later, these didn't stick around much longer, so stay tuned. Moving down to the tank farm expansion area, we can see the crews have begun mounting the new pipe racks to their newly poured bases against the wall that runs against the length of the orbital tank farm. Where the racks will go beyond here, we'll just have to wait and see. But we can see one additional newly poured base just on the other side of the left-hand wall. As we head up to the Deluge tank farm, we can see interesting work occurring over on the left side of the weeks-old parking lot. Using a water truck as their water source, crews are cutting the concrete across the small peninsula. In the following days, excavation work could be seen occurring in this area via the 24/7 livestream cams. At this point, is it even a surprise when we see SpaceX ripping into new concrete? It's not clear at this point why this is happening, but hopefully the next flyover will provide some clues. At the water offload manifold, we see a tanker on site likely topping off the storage tanks ahead of the highly anticipated IFT-2 launch, which may be sooner than you think, so stay tuned. Now that we've covered the primary changes at the site since our last flyover, let's discuss the latest news, shall we? To follow up on the release of IFT-2 information from SpaceX discussed in our last episode, we have even more juicy details to provide this week. We'll get started on November 7th, when a Notice to Airmen, or NOTAM, was released for Mexican airspace between the dates of November 13th and November 18th. This provided coordinates to outline an area for falling debris of Starship rocket. In the early morning hours of November 8th, the stand used to support the hot stage ring and the load spreader used for lifting were spotted passing our RGV cam headed towards the build site. The same morning, a Notice to Mariners, or NOTMAR, was released for November 13th through the 18th, which matches the timeline of the earlier mentioned Mexican NOTAM. This provided coordinates to outline an area for hazardous operations rocket launching in the Gulf of Mexico. This was followed shortly by another NOTMAR for the waters off the coast of Hawaii. Once again, the date range of November 13th through the 18th was covered. If Starship lifts off, achieves second stage ignition and separation, and follows the planned trajectory, the ship should perform a belly flop into the Pacific Ocean at terminal velocity. What a spectacle that would be! These Not Mars were released by the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. The US Coast Guard released an update to the Not Mars later in the day, changing the start date for launch operations to November 15th at the earliest. An amendment to the Mexican NOTAM would be released by the FAA on November 10th, indicating a start date of no earlier than November 15th. As sunset was approaching on the evening of the 8th, the OLM and booster maintenance platform was seen being lowered onto its transport stand. It was later spotted on our RGV cam headed towards the build site for storage. This was a sign that work under the booster was complete, and there was no additional work planned prior to IFT-2. Now fast forward to November 9th. What was thought to be just another day at Starbase turned into a day filled with excitement and an endless supply of rumours. Mid-morning, a quartet of employees was spotted entering the container by the launch pad that contains the Flight Termination System, or FTS, explosive charges used on the vehicles. They would soon exit the container with metal cases labelled as 1.1D explosives strapped to their backs and make their way toward the launch pad. Thanks to ex-user Vixie and Lab Padre's live cam for this awesome clip. For the better part of 12 hours, crews and lifts went up and down numerous times working to install the charges on both vehicles, likely double and triple checking their work. After the failure to immediately destroy the vehicles during IFT-1, SpaceX can ill afford another FTS hiccup. The LR-11000 crane also made its way over to the suborbital site and lowered its boom in similar fashion to IFT-1 launch preparations. After a long day filled with speculation surrounding the outcome of the assessment by the Fish and Wildlife Service and subsequently the status of the amended launch license, SpaceX put the cherry on top by stacking S-25 on top of B-9 for a sixth time as the clock approached midnight, seemingly in a rush to beat poor weather that was rapidly approaching. Special thanks to ex-user Basecamp Zero for capturing this amazing photo of the stacking operation. Surely this was the final stack, right? In case you're wondering where those spotlights are coming from, we can see the cabinets where they're mounted next to the FTS container and the orbital tank farm expansion area. Just prior to the start of stacking operations, the Raptor installation stand was spotted leaving the launch site and eventually ended up at Sanchez for storage. About midway through stacking operations, B9's transport stand left the launch site and headed in the same direction. All the pieces were falling into place for an exciting week ahead. But this wouldn't last long. The evening of November 10th, in classic Starbase fashion, SpaceX laid down the Uno reverse card by rolling the hot stage ring stand and load spreader back to the launch site. Just moments later, SpaceX would put an end to any sudden fears of plans changing by dropping the tweet we'd all been waiting nearly 7 months for, saying, "Starship preparing for launch as early as November 17th, pending final regulatory approval." Accompanying the tweet was this incredible video highlighting some of the dramatic moments from IFT-1 and also some of the major milestones leading up to this upcoming flight. The end of the statement cleared up any confusion regarding the status of their amended launch license, confirming it had not yet been received. That said, with FTS installed, NOTAMs and Not Mars in place, and an official no earlier than date directly from SpaceX for the first time, it feels like we're right around the corner from the highly anticipated second flight of a fully integrated Starship stack. On November 11th, following the rollback of the hot stage ring and load spreader, SpaceX destacked S-25 and B-9 for a record 6th time. The LR-11000 crane was also awoken from its short-lived slumber. Once again, thank you to Lab Padre's live cam and ex-user Vixie for this footage. It's unclear at this time what the purpose of this destack is, but with the removal of the hot stage ring expected, it could just be final checkouts for all hardware and avionics equipment, as well as more FTS work to ensure all is in order before the big day arrives. Hi all, Jeff here from the future. On the morning of November 15th, SpaceX received word the US Fish and Wildlife Service had completed their biological assessment of the impacts from the use of the new deluge system at the launch site. Here's a summary of their written reassessment. The deluge tanks have a capacity of 358,000 gallons. Launches are expected to use only 132,000 gallons maximum, so it is possible the system could be used twice. Static fires will use approximately 72,000 gallons. SpaceX will be able to use the deluge up to 30 times per year. The nitrogen purge to activate the deluge operates at 3000 psi. A launch is expected to ablate up to 190 pounds of steel from the plate. Note that this is likely a worst-case figure and not expected to be the norm. In fact, SpaceX water samples following the B-9 static fires from August 6th and 25th showed minimal traces of metals consistent with stainless steel ablation, with the second static fire showing far less. It was noted the first static fire likely contained residuals from the fabrication of the plate. The assessment stated the exhaust plume from the minimal amount of ablation on the stainless divertor would have no long-term negative effects to ecological communities and have no significant impact on biological resources, water resources, or soils and geology. 92% of the deluge water is expected to be vaporized. SpaceX is expected to add up to 30,000 gallons of additional retention pond storage in the future. Retention pond water can be reused if it passes environmental testing, otherwise the pond water must be shipped out for waste. The assessment finds no significant environmental impacts are expected to wildlife or vegetation at this time, and no mitigations are required for SpaceX currently. As always, the Fish and Wildlife Service can come back and request a new reassessment and changes if impacts beyond expectations are found. Later in the afternoon, the moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. After nearly 7 months, the amendment to SpaceX's FAA launch license arrived just 2 days before the anticipated launch of IFT-2. With closures scheduled, NOTAMs, not Mars, temporary flight restrictions, and these final pieces of the puzzle finally in place, SpaceX is preparing to stack S-25 atop B-9 for the final time ahead of liftoff just after sunrise Friday, November 17th. Launch is currently set for no earlier than 7 AM Central Time, which is the opening of their 2-hour window. Godspeed, IFT-2. And that's it for episode 24 of Starbase Flyover Update. Thank you once again for choosing to fly with RGV aerial photography. I hope you enjoyed the flight. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe for more episodes and content so you don't miss out on the new videos each week. I'm Jeff A, and we'll see you next week from 10,500 feet. Cheers for now.